Boa tarde, pessoal. Vamos retornar aí ao nosso Fórum BCOP, ICANN, edição especial do NIS. Importante lembrar, para aqueles que não sabem ou começaram a acompanhar o evento a partir de agora, é que a gente tem palestrantes internacionais e temos transmissão em inglês e espanhol. Então,
broadcast in English and Spanish. If you want to hear English or Spanish, feel free. If you're here in person, we have devices for you to collect and listen to the interpretation. For us not to delay very much our event, I'd like to call our keynote speaker who's going to talk about DNS abuse and global panorama or global threat landscape. Sean, the floor is yours.
I'm going to put here just in case you have Q&A. Please.
Thank you. Hi there, everyone. So thank you for inviting me to speak here today. It's been
A little closer.
Closer?
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
It's been a fantastic week. I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of interesting conversations with different people. And hopefully, I can maintain that standard for the next half hour. So I'm going to talk about DNS abuse and what we see on a global scale. As a background, I'm going to introduce the team that I work in and describe how we think about the world of DNS abuse, what attitude we come at it with. I'll talk about a sample project just to illustrate some of the work that we've done, give a few examples of something we saw. I'm going to have a little bit of a break and talk about the local picture. So before this presentation, I did a little bit of research into what we see specifically for Brazil. I'll give a few examples. I'll talk about a second project called Informal, which is about looking at why we see concentrations of abuse, and then I'll just sum up. So here's a couple of quotes from Ross Anderson and Tyler Moore, which influence the way we think about the world and why systems become abused. And we think a lot about the bad or misaligned incentives as a driver of why things fail. And there's also a point that they make where the person paying the price of failure is not the person who can prevent that failure. And when there's a mismatch, you tend to get bad things happening. And this is not specifically about DNS or DNS abuse. This is the security world in general, but it definitely applies to the world we work in. So we know that there are lots of components in the DNS ecosystem, lots of different players, lots of interfaces between different parties. And all of those things introduce a vector for attack. They're weak points in the system. So we talk in the security world about the attack surface, like how many different ways are there to break a system. And if you think about DNS, there are lots of different parties you can target in order to get something. So the other thing that I have to define is when we talk about DNS abuse in an ICANN context, we have a very specific definition, and this is built into the contracts that ICANN holds with the accredited registries and registrars, which means that our view is limited to phishing, malware, botnet command and control. We also include farming, but that's much harder to see in the data that we have access to. And we include spam, where that spam is used as a vector for one of the other forms of abuse. So when I say DNS abuse, it's a relatively specific and constrained definition. So when we think about badly aligned incentives, we think about, well, how can we improve those incentives? And because we're data people in our team, we're working with data, we see it from the point of view of metrics. And how can we improve the metrics people use to see what their situation is? And the point about metrics is that good metrics are invaluable. And we've heard that through this morning's session, that metrics tell you what's going on. The reverse, though, is that if you have a bad metric or an inappropriate metric, it can give you a false picture of what's going on and actually cause you to do things that are not helping the situation. So metrics are great if they're the right one and if they're appropriate at that point in time. So this is the team I work in. We are the Security, Stability and Resiliency Research Team, and we work in the office of the Chief Technology Officer in ICANN. We're a relatively small group. There's 4 of us, and we're all from an academic background. So that's the way we approach our work, is look at the data, do some stuff with the data, produce some output, but always from an academically rigorous standpoint. So just very quickly, when we talk about data and we talk about metrics, we see the two things as different. So data is on the left here. It's like raw information. It can be useful, but on its own, it's probably not as informative as you can make it. So a metric is what happens when you take that data and you do something with it. Maybe you combine it with a second data set that you have access to. Maybe you put it through some kind of algorithm that can filter out some of the noise in that data and give you a clearer picture. So the difference between data and metrics is really important to us. It's what we spend our day-to-day work doing, is turning data into metrics. Okay, so that's the team I work in, and hopefully some insight into our mindset when we approach these problems. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about a project that we did called DNS Sticker. And the other thing that tells you is that ICANN loves acronyms. So DNS Sticker, and I can never remember this, the Domain Name Security Threat Information Collection and Reporting. Yeah, it was a little bit forced. But I hope I'm not spoiling anyone's day if I say that criminals use the internet. And one thing that we see time and time again is that large events, they trigger large bursts of domain name registrations. So if we think about the World Cup next year, there will be a really big slew of domain names created that are hooking in to that topic. But the one incident that really showed how large this effect can be was COVID-19. We'd never seen anything on that scale before. It was a much, much larger, much more noticeable event in the increase in registration than we'd seen before. And alongside, we were reading lots of articles from different companies saying that, look at all these suspicious domains that are being created, or look at all these high-risk URLs there are out there today. So there was a lot of worry and concern that the sky was falling in because of this event. But when you looked at the articles, they were measuring different things. Some looked at domains, some looked at URLs, some looked at hosts. And when they say suspicious or high risk, there was very little definition of what that actually meant. So we wanted to investigate that space, but also publish a very clear methodology about how we were doing it so that it could be understood when we said that these things were risky or they might be malicious, that we had some kind of evidence to back that up, not just the fact that they happen to have a specific string somewhere within the name. So here's a very simple flow diagram of how the project worked. We took our input from the GTLD zone files, because we have access to those on a daily basis. We filtered new entries on a whole list of terms that were associated with the event, including translations and IDNs and all sorts of different variations that we tried to include. We changed the list, we added terms to the list as the event progressed and as things changed over time. So that filtered list, we then looked those domains up against as many different sources of reputation data as we could find. Things like VirusTotal, PhishTank, Google Safe Browsing, all these sorts of pieces of evidence that we could gather as to whether a domain has been seen to be acting maliciously. We would collect those. And if we saw something, if we saw a report on VirusTotal, for example, we would move on to the next stage. We would try and gather screenshots, we would gather DNS settings, all sorts of context and other information that we could have. And then we had a human in the loop. So we wanted to report these domains, but we needed to be sure that they really were malicious. So we had a human look through the data. It was actually me. Look through the data, look through the screenshot. Is it definitely phishing? Does it look like it's distributing malware? If yes, then we could create a report and send it to the responsible registrar. More often than not, even when you get small bits of evidence, it's not enough to report it. So most domains didn't get reported. And here's what we saw. So there's 3 years of data on this graph. The blue line is simply the number of registrations that matched one or more of our terms. The red line is the number of those that had a match against one of our reputation sources. So as you can see, there's a big difference. Most of the domains that came in that looked like they might be involved with the event had no evidence of malicious behavior at all. But things changed over time. So, for example, here we see the registration rate that was matching the word vaccine. And you can see kind of at the beginning of 2020, it rose a little bit with the rest of the traffic we were seeing. But really, it was only in November that it started to take off and have any real amount of volume compared to what else was happening. The other thing that we saw over this period is how the terminology was changing. So the initial most common term was corona, because it was described as the coronavirus very early on in the event. But pretty soon the term COVID-19 became the dominant way that people talked about it and the dominant number of registrations we saw. But you don't need to look at the TLDs and look at the number of registrations to see the same picture. This is the Google Trends for those words, for corona, for COVID, and for vaccine. And it follows exactly the same pattern that we saw in the registration volumes over the same period of time. So you can see the term vaccine kind of starting to become more prevalent in November of 2020, exactly the same time that we saw registrations increasing. So this tells us that really it's just about how society is talking about this event. That's what's driving the number of registrations and, to some extent, the number of malicious registrations using particular words or phrases. The other thing to point out is we saw no evidence of a significant increase in overall abuse through this same time period. So it's not like all of these COVID phishing domains were on top of all the other phishing domains that were being seen at the time. They basically replaced all of the other phishing domains that would have been seen at the time. Okay? And we've seen this throughout time. Malicious actors, they evolve their tactics because they change to do whatever it is that works at a particular point in time. The other thing worth saying, and I kind of mentioned it, but the majority of registrations that we saw had no evidence of abuse. They were probably just speculatively registered. Maybe I can make some money if I have this particular name. So just to show some examples of what we saw, this is a Turkish phishing attempt. It's the government health ministry that's particularly targeted. The logos and stuff match that. But this was distributing malware. We saw campaigns targeting the various government hardship funds that were available. So obviously the offer of money is a very attractive thing. But again, this is not part of the legitimate US government site, so it's definitely not doing what it pretends to do. And we also saw the rise of these, which I'm guessing everyone's kind of familiar with. They still exist today. The parcel delivery fraud. You know, you have a parcel, maybe it's stuck in customs and you have to pay something, or maybe there was a shortfall in the delivery fee that you have to make up before they can deliver your parcel. They existed before COVID, but they really, really started to get traction during that event. Okay, so that's that one project, both the statistics and some of the more sort of anecdotal stuff that came out of that. I'm just going to look briefly at the local picture here in Brazil. So I think this is maybe not very clear. I think the slides will be available, so you'll be able to see this after if you download the slides. Basically, this is a site called urlscan.io, and they look at the countries that are being targeted by particular phishing events. And what we can see, I don't know if you can read where it says industry verticals down the left, but basically you've got banking, financial, government, retail, everything that you'd expect to see. Because what's going to be targeted? It's high-value accounts. Accounts where maybe there's monetary value or some other value like a resale value or stealing credit card data. That's what people are targeting. So it's not surprising that you see that list of stuff. We see targeted events. And I think when I was looking at the particular picture for Brazil, something that struck me was how, excuse me, how specifically targeted some of these things are. But of course it makes sense because of the language situation where you don't share a language with the people around your borders. So when you see the distribution of stuff, if you look at these full reports and the links are on there, you see how tightly targeted some of these things are. Otherwise, it's all the same kind of things that you see wherever you look, whichever country you look in. So again, government sites are very often replicated, and people claim to be different departments in the government, tax at a particular time of year is a very common one globally. Yeah, you see the same kind of tactics, just here they're targeted with your kind of branding and obviously the language as well. And malware, again, particularly targeting the country. We also see phishing, obviously, within the .br space as well. Not very much. In general, CCTLDs tend to show less abuse by volume than the generic TLDs do, but it's still there. It's still there, and here we have one that's looking like a webmail login, and another one that's pretending to be Airbnb. So I think the message I was trying to get with this was, yes, there is like phishing, there is malware distribution that's particularly targeted at Brazil. But I could say the same for any country. If I was giving this talk somewhere else in the world, I could tell exactly the same story. The exact examples would be different, but the story, by and large, would be the same. Banking, financial, government. Those are the three main things that you see. Okay, so the final thing I'm going to talk about is a project called Informal. This is a study. It wasn't actually conducted by ICANN, but ICANN funded it. So it was carried out by some academics. They work in a group called Core Labs, which is from the University of Grenoble in France. And there's a couple of links there if you want to get more details on this particular study. It's very interesting. It's also very detailed. The level of analysis that was done, the methodology, the analysis techniques are very specific and very complex in some cases. So if you're interested, I recommend you go to the source material because I can't really do it justice in 5 slides. But that said, I'll try. So the idea behind this project was to look into why we see particular concentrations of abuse. So that's a concentration in a particular space, either a particular TLD or with a particular registrar. And it looked at the problem from the attacker's point of view. So the mindset is, if I want to create a malicious domain, and specifically phishing in this report, what am I going to look for? What's going to encourage me to register my domain here and not there? And the way this was done is the whole process of creating a domain and the lifespan of the domain, so some factors that would happen after the domain was created. Those processes were broken down into different features, and over 73 features pushed broadly into 3 different buckets. So registration attributes. So what happens at the point of registration that encourages me to use that particular registrar registry? Do they provide an API? So can I automate that process, for example? What payment methods do they allow? Can I pay with cryptocurrency? Can I pay with Bitcoin? How much does it cost? Is there a particular promotion on at that time where if I buy X domains, I get 1 free, or buy your first 10 domains as a new customer and they'll all be half price? Is there some kind of discounting going on? And then what other services are offered? So if I create a domain, is it instantly, there's a website, there's DNS hosting, there's email, and it's all available, and I don't have to do anything. It's all part of the same process. So that's what we refer to as registration attributes. Then there's steps that either the registry or the registrar take to validate the creation of that domain. So you obviously have to give some kind of personal details. Are they validated, or at least seen to be plausible? Is there an @ sign in an email? Is the phone number the correct format, and so on? They did a little bit of string-based validation, by which they mean if I try and create a domain that's got the word Facebook in it, will that be allowed, or will that be caught during the registration process? Or what if I try and create a domain that's actually just a hash of some string, so it's a random-looking set of numbers and letters? Would that be allowed, or will that be caught at the point of registration? And then, what sort of restrictions are put on registrations? Do I have to have a presence in the country? Do I have to somehow show ID to prove that I'm a resident? Or, if it's a particular trade that's been targeted, do I have to prove that I'm a plumber to create the domain? Or is there none of that going on? And then the final group was, what's the reputation of that space, essentially? How quickly do they act on abuses of report? So if I create my domain, how long can I expect it to be up there after it's been seen to be malicious before it's taken down? So those are the factors that were incorporated into the statistical models. And this is some of the data that came out of that. So in terms of price, there was a weak positive correlation. The bigger correlation in terms of how much it cost was actually discount. Discount seemed to be a much more attractive feature for the people registering phishing domains. What payment methods are available was also seen to be a positive draw for the bad actors. And API availability, or probably more generally just the ability to automate the process of either creating an account or actually creating the domains as well, that's a really strong incentive for these people. So they don't have to visit a web page and create domains individually. They can push them through in bulk. Some of the other positive from the attacker's point of view, things like the services provided as part of domain registration. So, DNS and web hosting, it kind of makes sense that it's one fewer thing you have to do after you create your domain. On the flip side, the things that seemed to push the attackers out of your space, now obviously validation of either the individual, so do I need to see their ID or in some way validate that they are resident in the country, which is one of the examples they looked at. And are my details validated? So they obviously pushed people out of the space. And then, to me, one of the more interesting findings is this last one, the shorter uptime. So basically, how long can I expect my domain to live after it's been seen to be malicious and reported? That seemed to have very little effect on whether the attackers chose that particular space or not. And the thinking then is, they don't care. If it's up for long enough, if it's up for a few hours a day and then taken down, they've got their use out of it. So it's not a big driving force from the attacker's point of view. So some considerations about interpretation of these results, particularly if you're on the registrar side. A lot of those things that attract bad actors will also be attracting legitimate users. So stopping taking cryptocurrency payments. It may stop the bad guys, but it will also put off legitimate users, for example. So if you're looking at the report and thinking, oh, I could change that, just think twice and think about how that may affect your legitimate customers as well. Some of the headline figures gained a lot of traction when the report was published, and there are subtleties in the models that mean it may not be that, that stopping API access would immediately have a 400% effect, positive effect on the amount of abuse in your space. Yeah, and generally, these things are all complex and interact, so teasing these things out, it is a statistical model, and it may not actually play out that way if you change these things in the real world, because the bad actors adjust. They will just change their tactics. And so the final remarks. Bad actors have always changed their tactics. They always evolve to whatever works. And we hear a lot about how AI is going to make the situation worse. It won't change the fact that they changed their tactics, because they've always done it. This has always been there. It may make it faster, and it may make it easier. And finally, metrics are important, but not as important as the right metrics. And with that, I'll say thank you, obrigado. Thank you. I'm being flash red. We've got the panel, and I'm sitting in there, so we might as well just do it.
Não, eu já vou abrir para o painel, porque ele é do painel. Bom, pessoal, a gente não abriu para perguntas, porque o painel a seguir corresponde com essa apresentação. Então, a gente vai deixar as perguntas para o painel. Então, agora a gente vai ter o painel enfrentando o abuso de DNS. Eu gostaria de chamar agora o Daniel Fink, da ICANN, para ser o nosso moderador, a Raquel Gatto, do NIC.br, o Bruno Torezan, da Axur, o Paulo Henrique Benelli de Azevedo, que é coordenador do Laboratório de Operações Cibernéticas, e o Sean Lloyd, da ICANN.
Bom, boa tarde a todos, aos panelistas. Oi, Raquel. Obrigado.
Good afternoon to all panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks a lot.
Acho que o senhor apresentou muito bem.
Your talk, your presentation was so relevant. You gave us an amazing overview about the level of abuse that we have to face. And hearing from an expert like you, someone who is a leader in research and someone who's got data access was great. And now let's open this panel for discussion. I'm here replacing Mr. Rocky, who is the president of ABS. He is sick and he couldn't make. If you join us remotely, I wish you all the best. After Sean's presentation, I guess we have a very good and effective panel here with amazing representatives. On one hand, we have those who are responsible for taking actions against DNS abuse, those who have tools in hand to eliminate a possible threat or any event. This is Sion's case, who is here today representing the setting of those who work on generic names and someone who register name domains. And conversely, we have Rachel, who works in the legal department, and she is in charge of the same regulatory aspect to our code, which is the .br. And we have a team of experts who find out about the pains and the bottlenecks to be solved, which is the case of Dr. Benelli, who is here representing the civil police, the Department of Cybernetic Operations.
Boas interações que nós tivemos, eu achei maravilhoso o trabalho deles, que eles concentram todos os boletins de ocorrência.
Develop an amazing work. All the notice reports are investigated by his amazing team of experts who work and do their best to advocate and defeat for crimes. And Bruno, who uses a number of tools. They are highly specialized in technology. They already deployed AI and a number of other tools. So we detect a number of things. How can we report all of that? How can we take that to those decision makers? We have so much to hear from you, and I'd love to start with the demand. Dr. Paulo or Bruno, could you please start?
Obrigado, Daniel. Obrigado pelas palavras.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your kind words. Hello, dear panelists.
Great presentation. E acredito que a apresentação
I believe that Sean's presentation will somehow summarize and shorten down my time, because I had thought about some DNS abuses which he has already reported. I am the only representative from a public entity, so I'll try to share the public services endeavors and what we have been doing for activities like that.
Antes de tudo, apontar, Daniel, como chegou,
and also, Daniel, since 2025, we have been talking, trying to align a couple of actions, and Daniel has always said that the Justice Ministry and the Cybernetic Department should be involved into the debate. And what can we as police officers being able to talk and discuss with all of you? And Daniel said, no, we do need to set synergy, collaboration, public, private. We have to sit down, we have to talk to have a better response to face offenses and any DNS abuse. So let's try to understand what your obstacles and pains are. I mean, from both sides, yours and the federal police and civil police. I am the general coordinator currently for cybernetic crimes. I hate this name because we work for cyber crimes, and that is our cyber lab, cybercrime. Instead of cybernetic, we should say cybercrime, I guess. And it's called CyberLab. We work closer to the intelligent operations and at the Ministry of Justice, where we are within a committee which produces information components to the police state.
Muito embora eu seja policial,
although I am a police officer, our whole team at Cybersecurity Lab, being police officers as well, and with expertise in facing digital crime. But we are not a police station. We are not those who are in the front line. Our role is to manage information and to report that to cyber police stations or stations that deal with some sort of infraction, digital crime. At CyberLab, we want to submit reports in case there is an infringement or something like that. The civil police gets 80% of our reports and the federal one 20%. But we submit that to those agencies enough components or information for them to perform a police investigation, or if they have to open an inquiry.
Muito embora policiais atuando na atividade meio a providenciar relatórios de inteligência para as
It's up to us to have drafts of intelligence reports to the police officers and their stations. Within CyberLab, there are some hubs, and I guess that some of those, they will converge to one or another situation that you may have as a demand in your work. We operated for the 26 states plus the federal capital. São Paulo is the only state which did not signed an agreement, but all other states, in case a child disappears, they can get in touch with our cyber lab, and throughout an agreement and a technical collaboration together with Meta, we are able to implement an alert that there is a child who disappeared on a reach of 160 kilometers. And that is very similar to the American Amber Alert. So far, Instagram and Facebook, they are connected to Amber Alert. And TikTok and Uber Transportation, they are under some collaboration agreements to comply with this alert system. Anytime that a child disappears, they set a relationship with the platform and they trigger that information. So in that geographic area, they can send an alert that there is someone missing. We have another project which is Safe Schools. That is an operation which we did annually to monitor deep web at schools and to get reports from international platforms about any juvenile issues and possible school attacks. So by around March and April, when school starts back, we try to follow as close as possible with some tools these movements that will guarantee a safe school environment. We are the central point connection for the cyber network, where we develop best practices together with the several cyber actions labs. So in Espírito Santo, Bahia, and Tocantins, which are areas in the country of Brazil, they try to develop best practices, methodologies, and connecting all police officers. In Brazil, an offender may be in Ceará, the victim is in somewhere else, and we may have a scammer, and we have to manage all this cycle. And from a central hub at the Cyber Lab network, we are able to call all the responsible authorities. There are a total of 17 operations conducted together with the civil police, where we are trying to set targets to see where the scammers were and giving additional support to the civil police. Our capacity building program, which is called Cyber 40, Daniel has been invited so many times, and we are all waiting for you. Experts in the area, they might have something to share, or someone who works in the law enforcement of a company who would like to explain to a company how can police officers better feed a platform. So we bring together a number of officers within a team's room, where that expert will tell us how they may perform and how can that request be better done to that platform. We have the Cyber 40 platform, which is a way where we bind knowledge and best practices. We have integrated actions, cooperation together with platforms. We have some platforms who came after us with some notice and take down tools, and that is the target with Instagram and Facebook. And TikTok as well, with some tools that may bring down fake profiles, Facebook and TikTok. We can have that dialogue with some platforms, which is great. So this is our cybernetic operations lab, dealing with a number of crimes in the digital setting. And here I'd like to mention the Operation 404, when 2 weeks ago, actually November 27, we had that well-notified operation, speech hate crimes, digital involvement. We support civil police to find any banking frauds. The whole scope, it's in our umbrella to help police officers.
88 operações integradas, só para apontar, desde 2017 até agora.
Since 2017, 88 integrated operations. We are able to have 12 countries to talk to us. We have search and arrest mandates and 3,000 mandates of prison that the police officers, they did based on our reports. A little bit of our cyber operations.
Para poder ilustrar. E toda a operação nossa a gente faz card.
The whole operation, the seizures against piracy, capture, counterfeit, fraud, in case of any apprehension. And after learning more about our structure and to understand why DNS is so important to public security, and to that, I would like to thank Sean so much, talking about digital phishing, CISAM, deep web infrastructures, cyber squadding. We know and verify that is very important at all crimes like that. They start they have as their starting point DNS. To police officers, anytime that we verify anything prior to that, we start by DNS. We start our investigation by that. That's why it's so important to have this collaboration and this discussion among all of us. As in reality, we can give support to police anytime that we request and verify that there is a DNS abuse.
A gente realiza as coletas de evidência do DNS, faz a correlação técnica, faz o contato com registradores, e aí a gente consegue elaborar um relatório técnico para poder subsidiar as polícias. Relatório técnico que a gente fala aqui como fosse nosso report, nosso dossiê, né, que pode ser utilizado tanto no inquérito policial quanto no processo, para que a polícia consiga realizar a sua demanda, seja pedido
so that
de
the
busca,
police can actually fulfill its demand or send a notice or a warrant. So this is providing a report that will be provided to the law enforcement team, and that's it. And this is a very important point. Well, maybe people can be, bombarded with questions because of that. What do we find out on our side? We can verify as the greatest problem for public security the part of DNS frauds, an absence of standard in the response of registries. Some only respond with a legal notice only due to a lawsuit, and others only respond with a police report, and others only with the authority that is chairing the inquiry. Some registries only provide to us answers. They have some time to provide the answers. So there's no standard here, or any fixed pattern. What was interesting, and I was talking about this morning, I was complaining about that. Well, the police doesn't have a standard for us to ask. Well, it's incredible. It's precisely that. The most interesting part of boosting the bubble is try to understand how can we better understand and proceed in the answers that we provide. We also see migration domains, which is a problem for public security, use of privacy, or that makes it difficult for us to get there faster when they block the offshore hosting, local elaboration, and absence of an emergency channel for risk to life in some providers. So this is, personal details that I need to fill out the report so that I can actually create a report. I need that detail or that information urgently. Some websites do not provide that. Some registries do not have a point to be able to be questioned on an emergency mode. So you have to follow the normal flow, generating the average ticket and everything. So we have to think of an emergency channel when there is risk to life in some providers, and the delay in actually dropping some domains, fraudulent domains. Well, I know, moderator, that I'm going to go over my time. I'm rushing through it. And, this is, I'm being the first speaker, but some point when there is takes too long to actually drop some fraudulent domains. And I'm going to show you some case studies. This specific case, actually, there are cases where I'm bringing up a case that have been judged, that are disclosed, that I can show and share with you. We have several other cases that are still being judged and cannot be disclosed. I like to point out that this is a legal case and an extrajudicial case for us to discuss DNS abuse and the action of the public power in cooperation with private initiative. The first one is the Amazon Jungle Tours. It was a website created, hosted, registered abroad. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was in the UK, in England, he said. And it was created by a Brazilian person to sell tour packages to the Amazon. So the European population could get to know the Amazon with attractive prices, $15,000. And when foreigners arrived in Brazil, in Manaus, at the airport, they found out that there was no package. They had no booked hotel, no transfer, nothing. And they would immediately go to the tourist police station. And the police station was able to identify the Brazilian person living overseas and actually applied that and actually was acting criminally against foreigners. He was able to arrest them. And so the Interpol Red team was activated, but his website was still active. And the police officer from the Manaus called me. I understand the legal part. I have the warrant in hand. I'm going to talk to Interpol so that they can actually arrest him. Tell me about the technical part. What do I do with this website that is still acting criminally against people? So we searched the abuse channel of the platform to actually drop it.
Nós fizemos o quê?
So what did we do? We conducted, well, we made the necessary, took the necessary measures to drop the website. And then we communicated IANA with, so we had all the police inquiry, the arrest warrant of the owner. I proved to the hosted company that website belonged to the person that was being arrested. And only then were we able to have the removal or the fast. So, but that had to be very robust to avoid issues. And our colleague in the northern part of Brazil at the Amazon was able to see his demand being fulfilled and avoided other victims to onboard the airplane, get to the airplane and find out that they had been victims of a crime. This is the result. This is a case study. It was judged, and this is an extrajudicial one. It's called Operation 404 DNS, abuse on digital piracy. We identified some websites were selling games in a digital environment. And we identified that, and we had no time. We talked to the law enforcement teams. They had no time to ask for removal legally, but we had kept the data, we had collected the evidence, and we had pointed it in a very robust way that there was malintention malware against the police authority. So they were selling games, and the people responsible for the registration and hosting were the same. There was a complete commercial infrastructure. We pointed that out in a robust report, and we were able to make a notice communicating that such and such website has this that is material against it, it's committing crimes against intellectual property. The civil police of X state is aware. They have made a report, a police report, and we recommend the hosting services should be interrupted for this website. We submitted all those notices. Almost all providers accepted it, they understood, and plus they were actually not complying with the Brazilian legislation. We were able to actually block those websites. They were dropped, and we managed to remove this illicit commercial
Como lições
ecosystem.
aprendidas, e quase meu último slide,
As
juro que tô
lessons
acabando.
learned, promise almost my
A gente
last
entender, a gente
slide. I
pôr
promise
aqui, e
I'm
acho
about
importante
to end.
colocar isso na mesa,
It's important to bring this up.
alguns pontos que a gente aprendeu
Some points that we have
dentro do
learned
laboratório de operações
in
cibernéticas.
our cyber
Primeiro, a
operations
importância do
lab.
Marco Civil e
First, the
da obediência
importance
dele, que ele
of
é uma
the legal
ferramenta
framework
de
and complying
celeridade, não é
with
só um
it,
dispositivo legal, mas ele é uma ferramenta de
tool
celeridade
for
para as remoções.
speeding up
Em que
those
nós,
removals
enquanto
of
laboratório de operações
or
cibernéticas, a gente
criminal
consegue fazer uma
sites or
coordenação
domains.
para
So
o
we
Brasil
can
todo, de
coordinate
qualquer
throughout
outra
Brazil
situação.
through that
E é uma via de mão dupla,
any
inclusive,
kind of
com os
situation.
provedores,
So it's a
com os
two-way
registradores.
road
A
with
gente consegue,
ISPs
dos
and
registradores e provedores,
registries. We can
encaminhar
get
também a
from
demanda
them,
para
we
as
can
polícias.
submit the
E
demand to the
que não
law
existe
enforcement
bala de
teams,
prata
and there
contra
is
abuso de
no
DNS.
silver bullet
O
against
que a gente
DNS
pode fazer
abuse. What we can
é
do
sentar,
is actually
conversar,
sit down,
cooperar com
talk,
o outro,
cooperate
compreender
one with the other,
as dificuldades dos
understand the
registradores,
difficulties
provedores,
of
serviços de hospedagem,
registries,
dos
service,
órgãos públicos,
hosting
para que a gente possa
services or
caminhar junto
hosts,
com
public
soluções.
agencies, so that
Então,
we can
acredito que
move hand in
eram
hand with
essas
solutions. I believe
as minhas
those were
contribuições.
my
Muito obrigado.
contributions. Thank you
Excelente.
very
Muito
much.
obrigado, Dr. Paulo. Eu
Excellent.
gostei
Thank you
muito
very
do
much,
slide que você comentou das dificuldades. Eu acho que é um excelente
Mr. Azevedo. I like the slide you
planejamento que
mentioned
você
on the
colocou ali para a gente
difficulties. Well, it's great planning for
desenvolver
us
mais
to
ainda,
develop
trocar mais
further
informações,
and share
porque
more
um não sabe o
information,
que o outro
because
faz, então de
one
repente, em
doesn't
vez
know
de
what the
um
other
entender o
one is
outro
doing,
melhor, a
rather
gente
than one not
focar mais
understanding the
nas
other.
aproximações.
We should be
Comentar também o caso, obrigado
communicating
pelas
more.
histórias,
Thank you for
maravilhosas.
these, case
O
studies and the
exemplo do
stories. They
caso
were
do
wonderful. The
Jungle
example of
Tours,
the case of the jungle
nós comentamos
tours.
ontem, o
We
evento comentou
commented
ontem muito sobre
yesterday
os
at the
bloqueios
event.
que
We
nós
talked
fazemos, os
about the
provedores fazem no Brasil
blockings that
para
providers make in
proteger
Brazil to
usuários,
protect users.
Mas esse é o tipo do
But
caso
this is the
que
kind
mesmo
of
os bloqueios
the
que os provedores
case
fazem
that
aqui
even
não
the
protegem as vítimas
blockings
que estão no exterior.
providers make
Interessante, né?
here do not protect victims
Claro, daí a
overseas,
importância que
and
o senhor
hence the
comentou
importance that
da
you've
cooperação
mentioned on
internacional
international
e que às
cooperation.
vezes
And
é uma
sometimes
barreira, mas às vezes
it's
a
a
forma de
barrier,
cooperar
but
que nós
the
temos no Brasil
way
para nos defender desses
of
casos é
cooperating from
escrevendo
Brazil
reporte de
that we have in
abuso em
those cases
inglês
is
para aquela
writing
entidade
an
no exterior
abuse report in
que vende
English
aqui.
to the entity that
Obrigado pelo
actually
esclarecimento.
sold such things. Thank you
Queria
for
passar para
your
o Bruno.
presentation.
Bruno,
I'd like
por
to
favor.
turn over to Bruno. Bruno, please.
Boa tarde, pessoal. Tudo
Good
muito
afternoon,
feliz de estar aqui.
everyone. I'm
Obrigado,
very
Paulo,
happy to
também
be
pela,
here.
pela
Thank you, Paulo,
apresentação.
for your
O meu
beautiful
objetivo aqui vai
presentation.
ser conversar
My
pouco
goal here
sobre
is
a
to talk a
perspectiva
bit
de
about
abuso de
the
DNS
DNS
da Axur.
abuse viewpoint from
Bom, para quem não
Axur's
conhece, a
viewpoint. For those
Axur ela é uma
who don't
plataforma
know,
de
Axur is a
cibersegurança focada em
cybersecurity
segurança
platform
fora do
focusing
perímetro,
on
ou seja, todas as
security
ameaças digitais que podem
outside
acontecer
the
fora da infraestrutura da
perimeter,
empresa.
everything that may happen outside
E
the
eu separei
infrastructure
aqui
of the
três
company.
tópicos para a gente
And I have
conversar.
three
Que primeiro
topics to
é
address
o nosso
here.
panorama dos abusos
First,
de
our
DNS que a gente
DNS
percebe e
abuse
que a gente vê,
overview, what we
como a
notice
gente
and what we
combate
see.
o abuso
How
de
can we
DNS
fight
e,
DNS
no fim,
abuse?
também falar
And
pouco sobre
lastly,
alguns
I'll talk a bit
desafios que a gente
about some
enfrenta
challenges
e
that we
algumas
face and
sugestões de
some
solução.
possible solutions
Bom,
will
então,
be
sobre o
suggested
nosso panorama de
regarding
abuso de
our
DNS.
DNS abuse overview.
Num dia comum no Axur, a
And
gente
a
pode
common day,
analisar
on a common day
mais
at
de
Axur,
16
we can
milhões de
identify
URLs. Na verdade, a gente
over
coleta
16
ali
million
40, 50 milhões de
the
URLs e acaba
URLs,
analisando
and
umas
we
16
analyze
milhões
about
dessas.
16
E
million
dessas 16
of the
milhões de
40 million
URLs
we
que a gente
select. Of
pode
these
analisar num
16
dia,
million that we
a
can
gente faz
analyze on a
diversos
day,
filtros, como
we
a gente
make
vê
several
se o
filters.
domínio
We
ali
check whether the
resolve o
domain
DNS em algum
resolves the
registro
DNS in some
A4A, CNAME. A gente
registry.
pode ver a
A
idade do
for
RUIS
AC
também,
name, we
porque
see
geralmente esses ataques
the
são feitos
age
de
of the
domínios
rules. They
recém-registrados,
usually
se tem
made, those
portas
attacks are
abertas ali
usually
para o
made with
protocolo
recently
de HTTP ou
registered
HTTPS.
DNS. If they
E
had
depois de todos
anything
esses
regarding
filtros, a
HTTP,
gente pega e
HTTPS,
todos
after
os
all those
dias a
filters we
gente
take, and
faz uma
every day
inspeção
we
de
make
mais ou
an
menos 1
inspection of
milhão de
about
URLs
1
pelo
million
nosso modelo
URLs
de IA
using
generativo.
our generative AI
E
model.
com o resultado disso é que no ano de 2025 a gente
In the
analisou
year of
mais de
2025, we
5
analyzed
bilhões
over
de
5
URLs
billion
procurando por
URLs
fraudes
looking for
e a gente
frauds,
encontrou
and
mais
we
de
found
70
over
mil páginas de
70,000
phishing detectadas por nós
phishing
em 2025.
pages that were detected by us in 2025. And how do we detect them? What are the main patterns we notice on our data? We realized that 70% of the phishing scams don't use exactly the keyword of the company that they try to attack. They use other ones, and they sometimes don't use a similar word. So if you look only for that exact word without any flexibility of changing a letter or the other, disconsider those that do not use a keyword, you may not get several phishings. 18% of the phishings that we detect, we don't see the keyword in the HTML of the image to see how difficult it can be to detect those cases. They may be contained in an image, something else that is more difficult to be detected in a programmatic way. And to us, it was very important to develop this model to detect phishings, and this increased 10 times, more than tenfold, our detection of phishings, and our model tries to analyze frauds as if it is a human analyst. Here we have an example of a Netflix fraud or scam, and AI makes the description. And I detected the logo, and we had the field of sign in, and it acts in more or less two stages. The first stage tries to identify if that URL actually personifies some brand that we have. And then it tries to see what kind of action they call it call to action that part is seeking. And one quite common that is this case, which is a login page that can, for example, steal credentials. Another example is checkout as financial fraud, the person buying a product and they end up going into a fraud. But we also have, and we pick several other attributes. Many people are getting lots of scams, and it's very successful. Precisely, this code, decimal code, the exact colors, they are part of the visual identities of the brands. When they try to personify, we link certain colors to certain brands. And this is also an attribute that may be used to detect several phishings. And then we have a second stage when we try to evaluate with our proprietary model if that fraud or that scam, if that website is a scam and trying to commit some kind of malicious action. Another trend that we realized, whether we had to say, well, in 2025, what have been the main trend, the main scene of frauds? Certainly AI. Artificial intelligence has made development and also the dissemination of phishing much easier. So today it is much easier, much more accessible, even for people that do not have such technical background to create and develop websites and open them. And this makes it easier for fraudsters and its dissemination. So this is the threat hunting, our data lake. If we seek URLs with high level of impersonating or impersonating Netflix, if you have the lovable.web, it's an AI company that allows the creation very easily, only writing prompts of websites, and they don't have to register a domain. And once you don't register a domain, you use a subdomain of lovable.app. There are several cases here of Netflix alone. So let's move on to the second part. How do we face DNS abuse, which is the process that I work on and focus more at Axur, which is takedown process, as we call it. Basically, this takedown process is a process of sending notifications to the responsible entities, those that can actually do something and remove the threat. There are several entities we can notify to remove a scam But when we have those phishing cases, the most important are the hosting provider, the company that has the machine where the software is actually running, and the registrars, the companies where the domains used by the fraudsters have been used.
Funciona muito bem, até porque a Axura está há muito tempo no mercado e ela já
this
criou
takedown process works very well because the companies in the market has created a relationship with several entities. In 2020, we could remove over 44,000 pages of phishing. That's a very significant number. And our success rate this year to remove phishing was over 98%.
A mediana do uptime, e a gente considera o uptime sendo o tempo da primeira notificação até a nossa detecção da derrubada do conteúdo, foi menos de 10 horas, o que é muito bom. Porém, mesmo assim, a gente enfrenta diversos desafios e, assim como o Paulo, a gente também traz aqui algumas sugestões para todo mundo trabalhar junto ali, desde os órgãos públicos, as empresas que reportam como a Axur, as empresas que são da espinha dorsal da internet da ICANN, para a gente se unir e combater a fraude juntos. Então, a velocidade ela é muito crítica no processo de luta contra abusos de DNS. É muito importante ser muito rápido. A grande maioria das vítimas, em qualquer estudo que vocês forem ver, elas caem na fraude nas primeiras 24 horas. Por isso que eu também achei muito interessante ali na palestra do Sean, que ele falou que não teve correlação entre o uptime dos registrares e os registrares que os fraudadores escolhiam para fraude. Porque eles sabem que aquilo ali não é uma fraude que vai durar muito tempo. Eles vão botar no ar ali e na primeira hora já
too long. They are going to have that in their first day where 90% of all frauds take place. So that is very fast and we've got to be fast as well. The financial impact and some other impacts such as the number of stolen credentials, they increase hour after hours, and attacks, they take place at nighttime or over the weekends, where people might not be so cautious about that due to late night shifts. Automated flows, they are essentials, so we may be able to minimize the fraud impact as much as possible. And this is our main challenge. They are barriers to automation of the reports. Most of the channels, they are public. Anyone may notify, which is so good because we can make the channels more democratic and anyone may report it and talk it to a number of entities so we can have some channels of privilege. We understand that channels like that, they are also explored by the attackers or by where they want to submit data of low quality, such as spams, which will just impair the quality of the work of those who get the reports. Many of the companies, they end up adding automation barriers, which will prevent the automation of the inquiries. And those barriers, they will not allow spams to be sent, or that companies will be victims of their frauds, or the takedown process where they are going to build up notification channels which will work 24/7 in case the system detects, let's say, a phishing at 3 a.m. which has been spread fast. We are able to send the first notification very fast, and then we'll be able to drop that also fast. Our recommendation is to have report channels which are friendly to automation, with an attempt to those who are submitting those reports, where we'll be able to create channels of companies and institutions in the financial sector, where we'll be able to have fast and automatic reports using all the power of technology to disseminate frauds on an easy matter. And then technology has to be used to defeat that in the same level. And what makes us really, really happy about is that several are doing that and offering channels. And I have GoDaddy, which is an example, and also MTIC, where they created APIs, abuse APIs, so then we may choose that in such a way right after our system detects a fraud, which is where the takedown action will be necessary. And our second challenge is very similar, which are entities which do not work fast enough. They just ignore that. And from a server side, they have the bulletproof hosts, which are done to host fraud. You may host your fraud, and that is not going to go down. And from a domain perspective, we have ICANN that will have some operating channels. There is a recent report from Tech Radar that was concluded by police actions.
A nossa solução para esses casos é contar com os órgãos públicos, contar com o trabalho ali do time do Paulo, para que eles possam atuar, por exemplo, nesses casos.
So together they'll be able to work in bulletproof hosting that will require a police action. And we are very happy to learn more about ICANN and how we can defeat fraud and the fiscalizations that all of them are following the requests to work on mitigation of DNS. They have rules to follow, and if they don't do it, ICANN is going to investigate and to get the reports. And we are very excited for the fraud overview. Thank you.
Bruno, você começou assustando a gente dizendo que são 70 mil phishings no ano passado, me deu susto.
You said 70,000 phishing just in last year.
Parabéns pela explicação.
Congratulations for the explanation and for the ICANN compliance. Where to ask for help. International registers, they don't understand our reports, but the ICANN compliance is done for that purpose. And to help a little bit more with that, Rachel, welcome.
Daniel, não sei se o slide chegou para vocês, mas antes de subir os slides, eu queria começar com
Before that,
também pouquinho de como veio esse convite do Daniel.
How about Daniel's invitations?
Então, você consegue trazer alguma coisa diferente, interessante, relevante? E aí, gente, eu não sei porquê.
I don't know exactly why, but it made me think about Grinch. I don't know, because it's Christmas time in Brazil since October, September. We have a panettone on the shelves. And if you haven't forgotten, I got a Father Christmas coat.
Aqui o último painel do evento em espírito natalino, brincadeiras à parte. Daniel, agradecer o convite, agradecer.
Thank you, Daniel, for the invitation.
Colegas aqui do painel, a gente tem feito algumas dobradinhas.
We have some partnerships, ICANN with .br, and the importance to show what happens in this country. And when it's not a .br, it's .com. Where am I going to? What I have to do? And this is a very important partnership. type.
Não só para ajudar aqui a descontrair pouquinho nesse final do evento, mas para dizer que existe,
And
né,
let me tell
de
you
forma conceitual,
that from a
inclusive,
conceptual
uma
perspective,
discussão sobre a própria
there is a
definição do que é
discussion
abuso de
about
DNS,
what
né?
is the
Existe aquele
DNS
que é uma
abuse.
versão mais restrita,
We have
digamos, um
one
conceito
that
mais
is a more
restrito,
restrict
e que o
concept,
trouxe com excelência,
which
as
we
discussões sobre
have
phishing,
with
spam,
excellent
enfim, aquelas que
phishing,
foram discussões
spam,
mais técnicas de abuso
more
de
technical
DNS,
discussion
e
for
existe
DNS
aquele conceito
abuse,
mais ampliado,
and there is a
que eu
more
costumo dizer
broader
que são as
concept,
encrencas que estão ao redor do DNS,
which
que não
are
necessariamente é um abuso, mas são as encrencas, seja dos atores que estão ali, né, dos criminosos,
the obstacles
em
from
várias
authors that are
de
there
abuso
at
infantil,
several
enfim,
levels
mas
of
também aquelas que
children's
envolvem
abuse,
direitos
as
marcados,
well as those that
e
include
o
some
registro do
other
domínio em si,
rights,
né,
and the
tanto os dados
register of the
ativos
domain by
titulares quanto o
itself,
próprio
and
nome
by
de
that I
domínio.
mean the
Então, eu tentei
holders
trazer
and the
pouquinho
domain name.
diferente, né, dos meus colegas.
A
Eu
little
não
bit
poderia
different
deixar de
from my
mencionar, óbvio, a
colleagues,
estrutura do NIC. Aqui eu
and
acho que
let me
muitos já
mention
conhecem,
the
já
whole
ouviram ao
NIC.br
longo da semana
structure.
inteira. Mas mencionar que o NIC, como essa
And
estrutura
NIC,
né, grande, com vários ramos de atuação, uma associação sem fins
it's
lucrativos,
an NGO
obviamente atua em várias instâncias
which
desse abuso de
works
DNS.
at
Nós temos,
several
por exemplo,
levels
o
of the
CERT-BR,
DNS
que é o
abuse. We
nosso
have
centro, né, de tratativas
CERT-BR,
de
which
incidentes,
is our
que
center of
também
incident
faz
management
tanto o recebimento
that
dessas
also gets
notificações em
all
caso
the
de abuso,
receivables of the
traz as
notifications
estatísticas, né,
in
quem
case
ainda
of
não
abuse
acessou, tem
with the
o site
statistics.
com
If you
as
have not
estatísticas
assessed that
de
yet,
abuso de
there is a
DNS, e
website with
também o trabalho
DNS
preventivo, né, materiais
abuse and
informativos e
its
preventivos
statistics and some
que estão
preventive
disponíveis.
material
Então, não poderia deixar de
available,
fazer essa ligação, assim como o próprio registro BR, né, o
such as
centro
Register
nervoso, vamos dizer
BR,
assim, dessa
which is
atividade.
the nervous center
Mas,
of
do
this
ponto de vista,
activity.
até representando aqui o jurídico do
And being here
NIC.br
representing
e quais são
the
os casos que
legal
nós mais
department of
vemos, né,
NIC.br
a partir do
and what we
momento
see
em
more
que
frequently,
um indivíduo resolveu
it's
registrar
when
aquele nome
a
especial
subject tries
embaixo do
to
ponto
register
.br,
a
né?
special
Então ele
name
vai lá no
below
site e checa a
.br, so they go
disponibilidade.
to the
Bom,
website and
primeiro
check their
momento ele pode
availability.
descobrir que
First,
esse nome não está
they may
disponível
think
porque ele
that
já
this
foi
name is not
registrado
available
anteriormente, né? Ou
because
já
it
foi
has been
base
registered before.
de registro anterior. Ele pode descobrir também,
They
né,
may
que esse
also
nome está
find out
reservado.
that
Então,
this
dentro das regras,
name
desde o começo da
is
atividade, que é até
saved.
anterior ao próprio NIC.br, antigamente era feito como parte de um
Before
projeto da
that was
FAPESP,
part of a
essas
FAPESP
regras de
project
nomes
where
reservados. No
those
começo existia
saving
até nomes
names
debaixo do
rule.
balão,
We would even have
algumas outras
some,
listas, né, que vieram
silly
ao longo do
names and some
tempo,
other lists that came
órgãos públicos, enfim. Então,
public
existe ali uma série de nomes que são
entities and
reservados e que
others,
podem aparecer também como indisponível
names
nessa
that may
busca.
be not
E pode
available in the
ser, né,
search.
que
And
ele
it
também
can
não
be
consiga, ou aqui não
that
tem a ver com o nome em si, né, mas sim com
that is not
esse
necessarily
cuidado a
related
priori
to
de
the name,
checagem que nós
but a
fazemos
way
também.
as they
No
check.
caso do ponto .br, nós podemos fazer essa checagem. O ponto .br é só para brasileiros. Então,
.br is just
você
for
precisa ter pessoa
Brazilians.
física, um CPF,
You
pessoa
might have
jurídica, um CNPJ. E aí,
a
em convênio com a
subject
Serasa, a
with
gente
an
consegue
ID
fazer
or a
uma mínima
corporation with
verificação
their
se aquele
identification number,
CPF, por exemplo,
where
não
we can
corresponde
make
a
a minimal
menor, né, que
verification if
não
that
pode registrar, se
represents a
tem uma
smaller one
correspondência
which
do
cannot
nome
be
com
registered,
o
if
CPF que
there
foi
is a
colocado. Então,
name
minimamente ali
correspondence
também
to
já
the
é
name,
feita
so that
né, uma filtragem nesse
is
momento do
filtered
pré-registro, vamos dizer
in
assim.
the
Bom,
pre-registration
vamos
phase.
supor, e aqui a grande
Let's
maioria
suppose,
dos problemas, para ser bem sincero, eu acho que meus colegas já
and most
trouxeram, né, o
problems,
Paulo e o
to be
Bruno
very
trouxeram muito bem,
honest,
os problemas não estão bem nessa checagem, elas
problems are
estão mais
not right
no
in that
pós-registro, ou
level, but
seja,
more in the
a posteriori,
post-registration
o que vem
phase,
sendo feito com aquele domínio.
what they have been doing
E
with
aí
the
a gente tem
domain.
alguns mecanismos, né, que é isso
And
que eu
there are
queria
some
trazer aqui,
mechanisms, and that's exactly what
tanto
I'd
com
like to share
relação,
with
né,
all of
a
you.
encrenca
And they
com
have that,
relação aos dados do titular.
the holders'
A gente tem
information
mecanismo para fazer essa
that
rechecagem e essa
can
verificação.
recheck and
A
verify.
encrenca é com uma marca registrada,
Or
ou
let's
com
say that they
abuso
have
de
a problem
propriedade
with a
intelectual, com
brand
violação
name
ou possível
or a
violação
violation
de
of
propriedade
intellectual
intelectual. A
property or
gente tem
something
outro
like that.
mecanismo
there is another mechanism that will verify it. With this skilled audience that we have here, you all know that content may be a problem. .br is not responsible for content. You may save any domain, grinch.com.br. I don't even know if that is available. See that as an opportunity. Come on, grinch.com.br, having a content that is in favor of Christmas and very positive. As you can see, it can be a content against Christmas, which is not verified at the time of registration. Or you may have a name and never have a website over there. Therefore, the relationship between content and domain is very important, so we can know exactly who is responsible after all. That has been widely discussed at a number of panels, and especially after the decision of the Federal Supreme Court. And who hadn't heard about that? Someone has to say that internet is a free land or a land with no law. We do have a regulation, and not just the traditional one that we know as part of the legislative process, but also infra-legal, where you have the best practices. And maybe a better analogy here is where you have the protocols and the best practices. You have you have the law and the rules to play with. Anything may be applied, such as consumers, the code, and more specifically to the digital environment, we have the legal civil mark and the general privacy data law protection. And more recently this year, we have the status of children and adolescents in the digital system, which also has got some mechanisms to fulfill and to include DNS. And at NIC and CGI, we have our own resolutions. Today, the most updated ones is the 008 resolution, the last one with the main rules for the main name of .br. Then we have some information as the release process and our contract of .br domain, which also has that strength and which is very important, especially to define DNS abuse issues and responsibility of each one of them in that sense.
Quando a encrenca está ali na questão dos dados do titular, né?
If we have issues in the holders, in personal information, we have a RUIS. RUIS is a protocol, and all domains at ICANN are subject to the publication of holders. And that is so important. And how come we have a repository and a service of a repository? Because it has a way to verify the legitimacy, where several authorities, they make use of this verification. And during the COVID, we had our own team was blocked in their access. There is a limit where you have to convey information with several access where information is reduced. And the legal team was blocked themselves because they were working remotely. But there is a way to release that to authorities, which is RDDAP. That is a new protocol which blocks
limitação, digamos assim, do acesso ao RUIS. Mas a importância
RUIS access.
da informação dos titulares. Bom,
and
tem a
that
questão da
is
segurança
a way
online
to
também,
change
quer
the
dizer,
holder's
de
information.
repente você teve uma configuração,
Let's
uma
say
má
that you had
configuração,
a
e
bad
aqui também o
setup.
próprio gerenciamento, né, do domínio, você teve enfim, a Shure descobriu ali
Shure
defeito naquele
discovered
domínio,
a
e
defect
que de repente
in
não
the
é
domain,
malicioso, né?
which is not malicious.
Alguém não veio aqui para o evento e não
Someone
entendeu
didn't
direito
come to the
como
event and didn't learn well
desenvolver
how
ali o
to
site,
develop
né?
the
O protocolo,
website
enfim.
or the
Então,
protocol.
isso pode acontecer, e você
Pronto.
vai diretamente no
So
titular,
this
né?
may
Você não precisa
occur, and
ter
you go directly
intermediário
to the
nessa
holder. You don't need
comunicação.
an
Então, outra
intermediary
importância de
in this
você ter
communication.
essas
So another
informações de
importance
forma
of your
pública,
having
né? E
such
claro,
information
se eu tive ali
publicly.
problema
And of course, if I've
maior,
had
né,
a
crime
greater
acontecendo, também
problem,
posso
some
acionar
crime
diretamente aquele
being
titular.
committed, I
Bom,
can actually
quais são esses dados,
communicate
né,
directly
afinal,
with
que
the
estão ali
holder.
no
So
RUIS, né? Hoje nós
what
publicamos
is
os
the
dados
data
do titular,
available in
os contatos
WHOIS?
técnicos
We
e
publish the
administrativos,
holder's
detalhes do
data
registro,
or
né? Então, a
details,
data de
technical and
criação, data de
administrative
expiração,
contacts,
provedor
details
responsável,
on the
servidor DNS
registry,
associado
creation
e o
date,
status do
expiration
registro.
date,
Houve a
provider responsible
necessidade
for
de
the
nós nos
registry and
adaptarmos à
DNS's development.
LGPD.
We had to adapt
Também,
to
né,
our
algo em
general
processo
data
que a
protection law.
própria ICANN passa
The
e
LGPD,
ainda
I
segue, né,
can
em
goes
discussão em
through
algumas
that, and they
instâncias
still
de adaptação,
discuss
adequação à
that in some
GDPR, né, o
instances of
equivalente
actually complying with our
europeu.
GDPR, with the
Aqui no Brasil,
European
claro, foi
GDPR.
mais fácil porque nós já temos
In
essa,
Brazil, it was
digamos, esse
easier because
filtro de
we
aplicação da
already
LGPD para
have
quem
this
é titular com
filter of
CPF, né,
compliance
somente para as
to
pessoas
LGBT, those that have
físicas,
a
esse
tax
é o
ID
escopo
that we
da
call
própria LGPD,
CPF.
e nós fizemos então
So this is the
essa
scope of
adaptação,
our law,
inclusive
and we
com
made this
a
adaptation,
pseudo-anonimização de
including
algumas
the
informações e mais recentemente
pseudo-anonymity of some
com
information,
a
and more
anonimização, nossa,
recently,
que nome difícil, né, gente? Vamos falar mais fácil aqui, a gente
pseudo-anonymity.
publica parcialmente o
She's saying it's
CPF.
quite a
Pronto,
difficult
assim fica
word
mais
to pronounce.
fácil.
So we publish
Então,
part
essa
of
foi
the tax ID
a
number.
última medida, né, que nós
So this
tomamos
is the
no
most
final de
recent measure we took
2024, então no final do
in
ano
late
passado, mas a
2024,
gente ainda informa, principalmente
but
para as
we
autoridades,
still inform,
o CPF
especially
completo, caso seja
authorities,
necessário,
the
né?
complete
Então não
tax
é uma
ID or
ocultação,
CPF if
digamos
needed.
assim,
So
mas
it's not
sim
hiding,
evitar ali uma
but
coleta massiva
actually
desses dados
avoiding
e
massive
eventual
collection of
violação da
such
LGPD.
data
Bom, eu
and
vou passar muito
possible
rapidamente
violation
aqui
of
para dizer que
our
nós
law
temos também outras
j-
encrencas,
on
né?
data
Vamos lá.
protection. So let me
Imagina
go
que
over
você foi
this
lá
briefly,
registrar
saying
pela
that we
primeira
have
vez no
other
registro
troubles.
BR
Imagine
o
you
seu domínio.
register in
E
the
aí você descobre que
.br
o seu ID já existe, que o
registry,
seu
your
CPF
domain,
já
you
está
find
sendo
out that your
utilizado,
ID
né?
already exists, that
Como
your
eu falei, a
tax
gente
ID is
faz a
already being
checagem
used.
ali do
As I
nome
said, we
com o
check
número.
the
Então, se
name
nos
with
dados
a
na
number.
receita estão ali, você não sabe se
If
alguém foi
the
e utilizou
data in the IRS
maliciosamente
are there, you don't
os
know if
seus
somebody
dados, né? O
used
famoso laranja.
your numbers, your data
Então, você virou
maliciously.
laranja aí no
And
nome
then
de
you have
domínio. Bom,
become
se isso
a
aconteceu,
John
a
Doe
gente vai entrar
in the domain
imediatamente
name.
com um
So if this
procedimento
happened, we
administrativo.
go immediately with an
E eu digo para
administrative
vocês que
procedure.
90%
And
dos
I
procedimentos
tell you that
administrativos que nós
90% of
instauramos
those
resultam no
procedures that
cancelamento do
we
domínio,
start
que significa a checagem
result
dos
in
documentos.
canceling
Então, a
the
gente vai
domain,
lá para
which
aquele
is the
titular,
document
seja pessoa
checking.
física, seja
So
pessoa
we
jurídica, e a gente
contact
pede que
the
eles mandem os
holder,
documentos comprovando que o Daniel é o
corporation, or
Daniel.
individual,
Talvez
and
me mande a
we
foto do
ask them
Grinch,
to
né,
submit the
gente? Mas
documents
assim,
proving that Daniel is Daniel.
é mais
Maybe they
bonito, tá bom?
submit Grinch's photo,
Acho que o Luca vai
looking
concordar, que é
better.
meu filho.
I think Luca will
Mas
agree, right? My son.
gente, então assim,
But
e
then,
aí 90%
guys, well,
desses
90%
procedimentos
of
acabam
such
resultando, né, mediante
procedures
essas
end
denúncias
up
de checagem documental,
resulting
resultam também
with the document checking, and they result in a filter and cancellation. What may occur? Well, just to mention, it's not on the slide. We have the evident phishing of those that come via notification from CERT, which is a recent domain of 24, 48 hours, visibly, short-living. It's a phishing of a bank with great repercussion. And we're not going to go into an administrative pursuit. We go to the sniper function and take the risks of simply removing that domain, moving on what is most traditional or mainstream. We have certain requests from administrative and law enforcement authorities. On average, we receive 60 notices and requests from authorities every month, and most of them ask for information of the domain holder, on the IP number, or payment information due to some investigation or possible report that will be submitted to the judiciary. So I mentioned EPP, especially regarding payment, because many times, well, let me explain how we operate. All the holder data are kept by the .br registry. But we have some companies, especially hosting companies, that make those registries in block or registrations in block. So those companies keep information on payment, for example, credit card data, etc. And information that many times can be relevant during an investigation. So those are the cases that we have to call upon those CPP, those intermediaries, so to speak, for this solicitation, because we do not have the information. Here, just moving on to another trouble, big trouble. I'm just adding to the previous presentations. When this trouble involves intellectual property, which is 99.9% of cases, but we're not limited. ICANN has a similar procedure, which is UGRP, Uniform Dispute Resolution Procedure, for generic domains, and also certain countries that adopt this regulation. In Brazil, we decided to have our own regulation, inspired, of course, on the UDRP, but aiming at a procedure that is administrative, that is fast and nimble, and the holder, or actually those that have some their name, anything that is some kind of previous entitlement to that expression that they feel they are being impacted or hindered, they can require briefly or quickly an analysis by experts so that they can actually obtain the transfer to the domain to themselves or its cancellation. This procedure this year, we celebrate actually 15 years of our launch. There are some books, if you're interested in the topic. There is a book actually that we published this year, some books to be handed to those that are interested in this topic, to show precisely the importance of such mechanisms that are extrajudicial, that come before litigation. Here on domain names of .br and the use of SANSI, it's important to mention that we have 3 chambers of experts, those that evaluate the procedure, supposing that there has been danielfink.com.br registration. Another tip, okay, you can register that, please. So you have to go to access SASI, as we call it. You don't have to access it. But I strongly encourage you to do that because it's going to be cheaper and faster than the judicial procedure. Not for lawyers. Well, colleagues, please don't listen to what I'm saying.
mostra que houve, né, indício ali de má fé.
Connect to SASI, see there is some kind of indication of
essa decisão de transferência.
bad faith, and then they can actually start a transfer. We made this study, about 75–80% of decisions are with the transfer of the claimant. Actually, there was this verification of the right. We had cases of celebrities, famous actresses like Bruna Marquezine, political candidates, those running for
eleições presidenciais. Então, isso também movimenta bastante o nosso universo do abuso do
government
DNS,
positions.
Né?
So next year we have presidential elections. There is usually DNS abuse in these times. So this effectiveness of the procedure in the past 15 years, we've seen that we have over 800 procedures of SASI, 800 procedures flooding our judiciary that is very much overloaded, and less than 3% of the cases have been trialed, and we had no reversion of such decisions. This shows that the procedure works, and it works up to 74 days. You have a result. The legal procedure, you can, well, consider 7 years at least, and some cases have been, trialed that were actually filed 20 years ago. So it's a procedure that is worth mentioning if you have any kind of situation in which you need to sue somebody. And when does it not work? Well, let's move on to the judiciary. Let's start fighting. Daniel asked us to make it interesting. So I overused visual resources here. So let's leave some time for questions. Let me wrap up. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Have a good afternoon and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Eu gostei muito da função sniper. Eu acho que a gente deveria
I love the sniper function. I think we should use that as an example. Thank you. Well, just to wrap up our panel, some words from Sean that has prepared a presentation, and I'd like to ask Sean if you could comment on the realities of our panelists and what you have learned from the comments and the discussions that you've had today on our reality here in Brazil. If you could, turn over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm still going to present in English. I'm going to go fairly quickly through the first half of this deck. I'll still try and speak slowly, but advance the slides rapidly. I was going to look at two different ways that we tackle or address DNS abuse. The first is in the measuring part and producing the metrics. And the second is a department within ICANN that I don't actually work in, but ICANN contractual compliance, which we've heard a little bit about. So I think that second half is perhaps more interesting given the current discussion we've had. So you've seen this slide before and this slide. So when we talked about turning data into metrics, the way that we then share those metrics with the public, with the community, is through a platform that we've developed called Domain Metrica, which is not an acronym. Essentially, we collect data, as you saw in that previous diagram. We combine it with other data sets. We do stuff, put it through algorithms, put it through particular methodologies to produce something that's more useful than the raw data by itself. And we produce statistics. We let people plot different graphs of the data and play with that data in particular ways, and then you can tailor the view to what you're interested in, and then you can download that data and do stuff that perhaps means you can combine it with your own data sets So stuff that we couldn't do with the data, but you can combine it with things that we don't have. And you can do that either via a web interface or programmatically. So if you want to extract particular data every single day and build a custom report on your side of the fence, this is the platform that allows you to do that. And yeah, so that's Domain Metrica. There'll be a link at the end of the slides if you want to know more, because I've just sped through that in pretty much record time for me. Talking about the actual how does abuse get tackled within ICANN, this is where our contractual compliance team can get involved. So there's different functions within the compliance team even, but the main way that you may interact with them is through their enforcement of the agreements that ICANN holds with accredited registries and registrars. So they can take action on those parties, either in response to an external complaint, or they actually proactively look for registries, registrars who are not fulfilling their obligations within their contracts. They publish a lot of statistics, and you put up a blog article that they did sort of explaining their procedures and telling people what's been going on. They also help when policies are being developed. So ICANN has this bottom-up, community-driven policy development procedure. But at the end of the day, that's the team that's going to have to enforce those policies. So they help make sure that the policies are actually enforceable at the end of the day. And they also do some outreach to raise awareness of the work that they've been doing. So significantly, on the 5th of April, 2024, the agreements with the contracted parties, so with the accredited registries and registrars, were amended to strengthen their obligations around taking action on DNS abuse. And between that time and the 5th of August, there's been 400 DNS abuse-related investigations by that team, which have resulted in, I can't see the figures, there we go, 20,000 malicious domains being suspended. And it's hard to tell, but hundreds of thousands more being addressed due to the processes that get implemented as a consequence of those interactions that compliance have with the contracted parties. There have also been formal breach notices. So that's where a contracted party gets publicly put under notice that if they do not implement procedures that bring them up to the point where they can meet their obligations, they will lose their accreditation. And within that time, there have been 2 audits, one registry audit and one registrar audit, that have involved asking questions about what are your procedures concerning responding to DNS abuse reports. So quite often, because of the way the figures are presented on the website, people only see those formal breach notices. But this is to show that there are a lot of other things happening that don't require going as far as a formal breach notice. So those 400 investigations that resulted in 4 formal breach notices, in other cases that didn't have to go that far, the contracted party put procedures in place to bring them up to be at a point where they were actually fulfilling their obligations. And the second figures here are all the other enforcement and investigation actions that were happening, because their obligations go beyond just DNS abuse. They involve running an RDAP server that gives the correct answers and all the other things that they need to do to be a responsible registry or registrar. So whether an enforcement process goes as far as a formal breach notice or whether it's done at an earlier stage, the outcomes are always the same. And the ideal outcome is that you end up with a contracted party who meets their obligations, because that's what everyone wants at the end of the day. So the first thing is they have to come up with a remediation plan. You know, what policies and procedures will you put in place so that you can meet your obligations? And then they have to show that that plan has been implemented. If there's a recurrence of the issue or the issues never get solved, then compliance will then step in and either get back in touch and say, what's going on, why aren't you doing this? Or a formal breach notice will be applied to that party. So I didn't really cover the left-hand side at all, but there's a lot more information on Domain Metrica if people are interested. Everyone can use it. It's completely free. You can have access to the data. And on the right-hand side, we have some links to more information about contractual compliance. And that bottom link, the PDF, is a step-by-step guide to how you submit a report to contractual compliance, what needs to have happened before you get to that point. And that link is for the Portuguese translation of that PDF. So hopefully that's the most useful version for this particular audience. So yeah, hopefully that was fast enough, Daniel. I think one question occurred to me, actually, while we were listening to those presentations. And when we see phishing, for example, and we report that to the registrar, our first thought is get that site taken down. Are there occasions whereby doing that, we're removing evidence that may be required for a future law enforcement case? And are there guides to what information should be maintained through that suspension process? What needs to be kept? What audit logs would be helpful if law enforcement later on have to step in and take action?
Se me permite, eu vou responder em português.
If you would allow me, I will answer you in English. I am able to understand, but not to talk, so I rather stick to Portuguese. Law enforcement to us as police officers or as any department of intelligence, that is a dilemma. Should we remove that immediately, or should we keep and preserve it for further investigation? Well, if it's a case where several sites and domains with phishing, and that is quite common with IPTV, many domains created by IPTV, we prefer to bring them down and to breach them. But if we realize that that is a more systemic case or a page with a business content or a solid fraud, we preserve the data and then we request the remove of that content. Usually those cases are more robust cases with more significant fraud, if you know what I mean. And sometimes we request data preservation, the referral of data, and posterior removal. Sometimes we are able to do a combo, a request combo to the ones in charge of the registration about the fake domain, to the registries. And the civil framework makes available that information for 6 months. Although we are still able to breach down that fraud content, but still that is stored for 6 months. Data is stored for an additional 6 months for posterior acquisition. Let's say that a police officer from another Brazilian state requests the removal, but the police from a different state is investigating the same group, and that has hindered the investigation of a third state investigation, because what mattered was the data and not the removal of the site. And with the LGPD and with the civil framework, we can still request data for additional 6 months posteriorly.
Perguntas de vocês, pessoal?
Are there any other questions? We still have a few minutes left.
Tem perguntas vindas.
Yes, we have a question, a remote question. Cicero, who is online, asks, what is the DNS logins roles in the detection of those frauds and in the legal sector?
Aqui na Axur, a gente eu não trabalho diretamente na parte de
I do not work directly in the detection, but rather in the reaction, which is a take.
Que os logs têm papel tão crucial na detecção. Às vezes, algum histórico para ver se teve mudanças ali do IP, tanto para detectar ali a parte das mudanças de registrar, como o Paulo comentou, mas na parte de detecção tem algumas outras questões ali que são mais importantes para uma detecção rápida, como, por exemplo, ver os domínios que foram registrados muito recentemente ou a emissão de certificados tende a ser mais eficiente ali na detecção dos phishings.
Bruno, pelo lado de cá, né, e até pegando um gancho no que você disse, quanto aos logs, quando a gente verifica, por exemplo, que um site mudou de diversos registros, né, verificou que o abuse daquele registrar está muito eficiente, ele pulou para o próximo e vai indo para outros, isso para a gente gera uma flag, gera um alerta. E a gente consegue, às vezes, rastreando pelos logs daquele site, verificar, poxa, naquele registrar dele, a gente não consegue solicitar, a gente solicitou e não responde os dados de cadastro. Porém, ele antes, a gente verificou pelos logs que ele estava na ICANN, por exemplo.
Via logs that it was at ICANN, for example. ICANN, can you check for us the data? And then we make an analysis of the history of those logs. We can request the registries to follow the steps of this fraudulent website.
Good afternoon, that's SPFox. That's a piece of curiosity. We know that logs are important for companies. I would like to know a little bit more about the police representatives. There is a new modality which we have mentioned here before about the residential or the household use. I think that's what he meant. If there is an invasion in the user's household where they would implement a proxy and to sell that as a way to attackers to use the IP address in such a way that they would be disguising themselves. Are you doing anything? Do you have any other cases? Can you add anything to that? In our cyber actions lab, we have a number of hubs, secure ones, cryptography, we have fraud combat, and we also have a group which supports investigation and high technology crimes. That is in our radar. We have seen that movement. It's a movement that is growing, and we are very alert to that. We were not able to detect any other demands carried out by the police officers. What we have seen so far are some external actions. Hello, I am from Anatel, the telco. We had an alert this year about bed box, where reverse engineering of some TV boxes are done, and we can clearly see the process, which has to be authenticated, where you see that the malware will activate the proxy services, and the client saw in the past days the exploration of the services. And now I have a question to Paulo. As we have a national security issues, how could we jointly do something? Brazil comes in first place in IP connected to malwares, which explore services like that. Do you have any idea as how we can do it? We have a number of studies and reports, and we had a talk with a colleague from the federal police where they identify an equipment in the federal police network. Once they get the notifications, they get the agents, and my call is that from a critical infrastructure standpoint and threats to Brazil as a country, as Brazil is one of the main victims of those TD boxes. And Anatel has participated with us in the last operation 040, where we had raised that situation. Now I recognize you. You were with us during the meeting with the Anatel. A crime against the telecommunication system, which interferes in the communication as a whole of that environment, where we may set a fiscalization. I even remember the level of radiation that the TV could have. We've talked to Anatel staff, but the federal police is in a case like that, and the investigation is with them.
Oi, Pedro.
Hello. I am Pedro from NIC.br, and I have a very straightforward question. In this attempt we have to understand that common language between perceptions, orientations, and same concepts. We heard before during Sion's talk about a more restricted DNS abuse, and you also showed in your presentation a definition which was broader. And why would that affect the ways to be used and different mechanisms behind that? Is there a closed definition for DNS, or is there anything more related to irregularities in the use of DNS? No, we don't have any set closed concept for that. That is a matter of digital crime and DNS abuse that is growing and growing, and there are some limits. We may check a DGA on a faster way. We have different types of abuses, and we have to go after that. To police officers, DNS is the entry door for that. We don't have a closed concept. We learn every single day.
I
Sean?
just want to mention as well, when we talk about that, that DNS abuse definition, we also acknowledge that it may change over time. So if something new comes along, that definition may be updated to incorporate an attack that we don't necessarily see nowadays.
Ok. Muito obrigado a todos. Acho que
Thank you so much to everyone. I think the home take message is the following. Internet is not a free land or a land with no rules because of the abuse, but that's not a reality to be accepted by us. And after this discussion panel, we could clearly see how institutions are prepared, how high competence companies are also prepared, and how ecosystem organizations are also prepared for that. And we count on everyone's help Everyone can do a report to help in that matter. It doesn't need to be Paulo exactly for the report. Anyone can do that. Of course, that he's going to continue doing a lot, but that is an additional effort to which each and every one of us have to be prepared every single day, especially us from the technical community. With that, I close and I thank you all for your time and participation.
Vai tirar foto? O pessoal está tirando a foto. Chegou o fotógrafo aqui.
Well, people are taking picture. In the meantime, we have some reminders. We would like to thank the support of Superintendents of Technology by the University of São Paulo and the sponsors Wildnet, Telic, Ediun, Elea Digital, Equinix, Nokia, CDN Star, WZ Tech, Vital, NTT Data, APS Global, SageNet Networks, PagTech, Siena, Nexus Guard, Ultranet, Tudo, Sirion Solution, ConnectWay, Abrint, Zapta Decon, LT Decon, Netflix, Electronet, Algar, Select, TL1, Accent, Abranet, and Fort Technology. I would like to thank all the participants for your attendance and, of course, our wonderful partnership with ICANN and all panelists who participate at our BCOP Forum and those who are here on site. Please don't forget to give back your interpretation headsets, and we hope to see you all in the next Infrastructure Week 2026. So we count on everyone's participation so we can have a better internet to all. Thank you very much.